Okay, you've made a few boxes and you want to kick your game up a notch by making threaded boxes. Or perhaps you want to make cremation urns with threaded lids or hollow forms with threaded finials. What's the best technique for you? Is it to use hand thread chasers? Or is it using a jig? Let me give you some information that'll help you make a more informed decision. Hi y'all, welcome to my shop. My name is Mike Peace and I'm a passionate wood turner, and I'm here to share with you tips, tricks, and techniques to help you become a better wood turner. If this is something you're interested in, please consider subscribing if you're not already a subscriber, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any future videos. Let's start with hand thread chasers. What's the best brand? Well, frankly, Robert Sorby is about the only game in town. There's just not enough demand, I think, for most manufacturers to get into making hand thread chasers. Crown makes a set, or makes 3 different sets, but I think you can have a hard time finding them in the United States. But Robert Sorby sets are fine. They're good thread chasers. It's all I've ever used. They have 3 different sizes. They've got a 10 threads per inch, a 16 threads per inch, and a 20 threads per inch. Crown out of the UK has 3 different sizes, but they vary a little bit. They've got a 12 inch, an 18 inch, and a 20 inch. If you look around, you might be able to find some used ones, probably more so in the UK where they were more prevalent in past days, and that you might find some antique ones that'll work just fine for you. I'm not going to be able to show you teach you how to thread chase and how to use a jig in this video. I just want to expose you to some of the considerations. First, as I mentioned, there's 3 different size hand thread chasers, and we're going to start with the 20 threads per inch. Frankly, it's the easiest one to cut because it's got the finest number of teeth. That said, you need a better quality of wood. There's very few domestic woods that you can hand thread chase at 20 threads per inch. It also moves the slowest because it's got more threads to traverse. That makes it a little easier. Now, one of the limitations on doing thread chasing is you need to have a lathe that will go down to, preferably 100 to 300 revolutions per minute. I won't say you can't do it at 500, the lowest speed on some of these mini lathes. I can tell you this: you've added a variable that really will increase the complexity. If you're a skilled thread chaser and you are demonstrating it on somebody's lathe, you probably do it successfully, but it does create a real serious challenge to learning. So the way we work, what we call strike the thread. Now I'm threading right now at actually close to 500, but I would normally do this a little bit slower. So let's get it down to about 330. You'll see the nice shavings you get with hardwood and a quality scraper. This is a challenge, but it's not that very difficult. It can be done, and it can be done on your own. Once you get that thread laid, you just come back and it just falls right in. Now I'm turning on Bradford pear. Is it the best wood for threads? No, but as a domestic wood, frankly, I've made a lot of boxes out of Bradford pear and have had real good success with thread chasing. Now we can see we're getting a little tear out. Sometimes you'll have a piece of wood, if it's too dry, even a good piece of wood, you can get some tear out. Now that's with 20 threads per inch. Now let me show you the challenge if you do it with 10 threads per inch. At that same lathe speed, this thing is going to move twice as fast, and that means you've got to be a little more careful and a little more precise. I'm turning at 330. All right, I don't have finished threads, but I'm getting there. But you can see the difference in size. Let me see if I can't get you a little bit of a close up. It's 10 threads per inch, 20 threads per inch. Now, when it comes to size, the 20 threads per inch, as I mentioned, generally works with only the best woods. Generally, what people call uranium-enriched woods, such as blackwood, African blackwood, or boxwood. There are a number of imported woods that work real well. One thing they have in common is they're all fairly expensive. The 20 threads per inch works fine on very small boxes less than 2 inches in diameter. I like the 10 threads per inch for boxes that are larger than 2 inches, maybe 2.5 to 3 inches, because I think the scale and proportion is nice. You also have a somewhat coarser thread, so in our domestic woods, you're going to have threads that will hold up better. The 20 threads per inch, because they're fine, they will have a tendency, if you're not careful, to cross thread. And of course, as I mentioned before, the biggest challenge you're going to have, it's going to be more expensive wood. Now, people often ask, well, what should I start with? My recommendation is to start with a 16 thread per inch. I find that to be a middle road between the 20 and the 10 in terms of speed. It's something that you can easily learn on. The teeth are not as coarse, so it's a little bit harder to cut threads than with the 20, because, as I mentioned before, the fine number of teeth engage a little bit easier. But also the 16 threads per inch is a fine middle of the road size that will fit on most boxes and have a pretty good proportion. You know, one of the advantages, I think, of hand thread chasing is it is a skill. Unlike downloading music on your smartphone, which, you know, somebody's got to show you how, maybe, if you're as old as I am, 70 years old. But once you got it, it's not that difficult for you to do it again and again and again. But frankly, hand thread chasing is more like playing a musical instrument. As a result, it is far more satisfying, because there's a certain zen to getting into this rhythm that's kind of hard to describe, but it really is fun. It's very satisfying knowing that you can do something that very few turners, frankly, can do, because either they thought it was too terribly difficult, and they just never really tried it. So the 16 threads per inch, like I say, is a pretty nice size. And it's probably worth mentioning that some people suggest making your own hand thread chasing tools, and I won't say it's impossible. If you're a machinist or if you're very skilled, you could give that a try. Frankly, I never was that skilled, and I felt like if I was just starting out, I didn't want to deal with one more variable that I may or may not fully be able to control and understand the nuances, and if it didn't work, whether or not it was me, or whether it was the wood, or whether it was the tool. And by the time you've developed those skills, you already have a hand thread chaser, and you don't need to make one. But that said, I had a conversation with my buddy Mark Soleil, and he said, well, you know, you can make one out of a 3/8 inch bolt. And I thought about it a little bit, and so I said, well, let's give it a try. I made one out of a 3-inch bolt. I was able to cut threads. I wasn't real satisfied with it. It's not as hard as even the high quality bolts, industrial strength bolts, are not going to be as hard as tool steel. And the challenge that I had is when you go to cut the male threads, you've got to cut them sideways, and I just found that very difficult to do. So is it possible? Yeah. Is it something you want to play with? Well, if you like messing with things, you know, go ahead and mess with it. But I don't think you're going to be real happy with cutting threads with a part of a bolt. So here's some of the advantages of hand thread chasing. Frankly, it's lower cost of entry. A pair of hand thread chasers can cost as little as about $70 if you get them from the right vendor. Secondly, besides the lower cost of entry, it can be faster because you don't have as much setup time. You put the wood on there and you can start turning. The disadvantage is it does require a higher quality wood than a threading jig, or more expensive wood typically, that you may not have readily available. The downside is there is a learning curve. It does take some practice, and you don't get it right every time. There's going to be a few times, no matter what happens, even with some practice, the threads won't turn out right. So it is a little more difficult to be consistently get high quality threads. Now let's talk about threading jigs. Now there's several different model threading jigs out on the market. We'll talk about that briefly, but basically there's two styles. There's the style such as this one by Chefware Kits, the Easy Threading Jig Pro, which mounts on the banjo, and you have to physically line it up parallel with the bedways. It works fine. It's just a step you got to be careful with. The other design, I think maybe I've got a picture here I can show you, fits in the bedway and moves up and down the bedway, so you don't have to line it up. One of the advantages that I like about this particular model, if you're demonstrating, is frequently you can just change from one to another size by changing the post. So you could actually use a jig like this on a mini lathe, change out the post, and use it on a larger lathe. The other thing, basically, they all have in common is they use what they call a lead screw, and basically it doesn't make any difference how fast you're turning it. The screw has the number of threads per inch. In this particular case, I believe this is the 10 threads per inch. So no matter how fast or slow, it's moving 10 threads per inch. Some of the models, in fact, most of them generally have an option of switching out the lead screw assembly, and you can get one with a different thread size, whether that's 20 threads per inch or 16 threads per inch or 10 threads per inch. And as I say, depends on what you're going to be turning. 16 threads per inch is a pretty good size. If you're making mostly larger items, like I make a lot of 3-inch boxes, for the 3-inch boxes I find the 10 threads per inch to be a better size. The other thing both designs have in common is you have a cross vise type of arrangement where you can move this in and out for the thread depth, both the inside thread and the exterior threads. And usually you'll just have some type of knob that you loosen, and it might have a scale that you turn thousandths of an inch, or it may have a detent. In this case, it's marked, I think, in looks like quarters, but it has a detent that you can kind of feel it as you turn it, and then you lock it down. The other thing they have in common, let me show you that, is that they're using a 60-degree rotary cutter. Most of them are going to come with the cutter, and you have to secure it in your headstock some kind of way. The most common way is with a 3/8" collet, and if it comes with the collet, you've got to make you a drawbar. You can go to a big box store, home development store, and get some coarse rod to fit it. In this case, this is, I believe, 3/8 inch, 16 threads per inch. And as it pulls it, it actually secures it. This thing runs similar to a router. It runs at a very high speed, somewhere in the area of maybe 2,500 RPM. Another purchase consideration when you go to buying a jig is what size nose piece or spindle adapter do you have on it. Typically they're going to come in 1-inch size for a mini lathe, or 1 1/4 for a larger lathe. If you have a smaller lathe, you may want to have it in the 1-inch size and do most of the work on a mini lathe. In some instances, you've got a situation where you'll cut the thread, and if it's not cut exactly right, you have to take it off the jig, put it back on your, put your chuck on here with a piece, and recut the thread. So sometimes there's an advantage of having a smaller lathe, so you can transfer it to the larger lathe. If you're using a 1-inch, if you're using it on a mini lathe, for example, then you might want to use a spindle adapter that will allow you to use that smaller size chuck and transfer it easily to a larger lathe. Now, it is possible to make a threading jig. It's not the easiest thing to do. Again, if you like to make things and you're very skilled, give it a try. I made one. I did an article for American Woodturner a number of years ago on how to make one. Frankly, I wasn't real satisfied with it, and afterwards I went out and bought a jig. I can't minimize the difficulty of getting those threads running true when you thread a chuck on, you know, whatever adapter you use. Frequently, for it to be cost effective, you're using coarse rod. The standards of those threads just are not that great, and it is difficult to get the thing to run true. But it is possible if it's something you want to play with. Go back. You can download that article off my website if you're interested in looking and seeing how that's done. Some people have good luck with a XY vise, so that is an option. If you are considering making a jig, you might want to click on the eye icon and watch a video I did where I discussed the pros and cons of making versus buying a jig. So the advantage of jigs are you get more reliable results. It's a much lower learning curve, and you can use woods that are a little more common to us: oak, hard maple, cherry, any number of other woods. Especially if you're using the larger teeth per inch, say the 10 teeth per inch. So you don't need to buy as the expensive uranium, what I call uranium enriched wood that is expensive import wood. There's two disadvantages that I see. Number one, you have that cost. They can be anywhere from typically from $300 to $600 for a jig, depending on the size and the manufacturer. Like everything else, there's no free lunch. Generally, you get what you pay for. A $300 jig's not going to be quite as refined as a $600 jig. The other disadvantages that I found, and if you can call it a disadvantage, I don't find it quite as satisfying. The results are quicker, very low learning curve, but there's just something about the zen of hand thread chasing that I find real rewarding that I don't quite get the same results with a jig. If you got this far in this video, I'd appreciate it if you click on the eye icon and give me some feedback on the poll of whether you want more or less future videos on thread chasing, whether it's using a jig or hand thread chasing. And of course, if you don't have access, and I understand why some of y'all will not see that poll. Different type of devices. I think maybe televisions, maybe tablets, maybe smartphones. You don't always see that icon. But in any case, you've always got the comment section, so you can always leave me a note in the comment on what your thoughts are future videos. Frankly, it's a very narrow topic, doesn't have as broad appeal, and I recognize that, and I guess maybe that's one of the reasons why I haven't done a lot of them. If you want some wonderful hand thread chasing videos right now, go to Sam Angelo's site, the Wyoming Woodturner. He's got a playlist of about 35 videos on hand thread chasing, and I've watched every one of them, some of them multiple times, and some of them were a great help to me when I first started hand thread chasing a number of years ago. For more on using a threading jig, you can watch this video shown here on making a threaded acorn box. If you're interested in hand thread chasing, I do have a video you can click on here on making a threaded box with a brass insert. So y'all stay safe. Come on back here.